They say beauty is pain, and within China's rich cultural past, there was one beauty standard that then and now could be considered the epitome of that statement. This practice is known as foot binding, and it began in the Song dynasty and would last until the mid to late Qing dynasty. Officially, the foot binding came into style when Emperor Li Yu was entranced by a court dancer, Yao Niang, who bound her feet into the shape of a new moon. Gradually, other court ladies who had the time and money began to pick up the foot binding trend as well. It became a symbol of status for everyone who was able to afford the cost. Throughout the popularity of foot binding, it remained as something that only the women participated in, and according to Amanda Foreman, the process takes about 2 years, but it starts at a very young age of about 5 to 6 years old. First, the feet are submerged into hot water and rubbed with oil before all the toes except for the big toe are broken and pressed against the sole of the foot. This will result in the desired triangle shape. Next, the foot is bent in order to create an arch, and a silk cloth that is 10 feet long and 2 inches wide would be wrapped around the foot in order to hold everything in place. The silk wrappings would be removed every 2 days to prevent blood and pus from causing an infection. During this time, excess flesh could be cut off or encouraged to rot, and once wrappings were put back on, they would be tighter than the first time. It is easy to believe that this process was very painful, and it is understandable that any young child who goes through this process would want to keep off her feet simply because it would have been too painful to walk. However, that is the exact opposite of what the girls were permitted, as they were made to walk very long distances in order to make their arches break faster. That would then allow the girls' feet to heal in that position, meaning that the foot binding process had come to an end. Just like modern beauty, there were standards of what was considered to be a perfectly bound foot. The most desired foot size was known as a golden lotus, which would have been 3 inches long. After that, there is the silver lotus, which would have come in at 4 inches, and that was considered respectable. Any foot that was 5 inches or longer was considered to be an iron lotus. Now, foot binding was not done for personal satisfaction, but rather it was done in order for women to be considered for marriage. This is the reason why it mattered as to what type of lotus a girl had, because if she had an iron lotus, she would have very low chances of marriage. While there were women whose feet were never bound, those women were looked down on by society. Researchers have wondered if there is a deeper reason as to why these tiny feet were so attractive to the Chinese for so long. A woman by the name of Hill Gates looked into the possibility that maybe Chinese men found bound feet to be sexually stimulating. Through many interviews with various men and women, she concluded that bound feet as a sexual stimulator was more of a myth than anything else. And this falls into reason because unbound feet were not acceptable, and therefore bound feet did not make a woman more attractive. Another researcher by the name of Blake Fred believed that the main reason as to why this foot style came to be so popular was because of a Chinese philosopher by the name of Confucius. Now, Confucius lived well before bound feet came into style, but it was through his teachings that influenced the East Asian culture long after his death. Through Neo-Confucian family system, women were taught to be very submissive to the men of the family. First came the husband and then her son, who in Chinese culture is the one who will care for his mother in her old age. Not only were these cultural beliefs mentally submissive, but by adding foot binding, the women of China were forced to become physically submissive as well. The women cannot physically get very far from their homes, and they are forced to depend solely on the men for everything. Fred even points out that foot binding is done by mothers to daughters as a way to show them how to survive in a world of men, in addition to being a sign of a mother's love and a daughter's virtue. With foot binding being both a painful as well as a cruel deformity procedure, it is only natural to be curious if there are any health issues that may arise for these women with bound feet later on in life. From a medical study done that focused mostly on the bone mass of women with bound feet, it was discovered that there was not a difference in bone mass between unbound feet and bound feet. There was, however, a negative effect upon a woman's posture, as well as the amount of work she was able to do within 1 day because of her bound feet. Another study done interviewed women in Beijing, China, who were 70 or older, and asked the women to complete a series of tests such as sitting down, getting up, and squatting. It was found, as mentioned earlier, that these women with bound feet had more difficulty than the women who did not have bound feet. Aside from the physical limitation brought on by the deformity, there were no other complications resulting from bound feet. The study did note that they were limited to the women who were able to show up, as a poorly done foot binding would have prevented a woman from reaching the interview location. As time goes on, there are fewer and fewer women in this world with bound feet. While this may not be a trend society wants to bring back, it is an important part of the Chinese culture and history, and therefore should always be remembered.